Our story continues. Mendel's head throbbed horribly, and not for the first time since his brother had been wrongly accused of the deaths of the missionaries. He leaned against a tree deep in the woods to the north as he tried to fight down the pain. This was now the third time he had blacked out for a period of time. The last thing he remembered was heading into town to see his brother. Placing his fingers on the bridge of his nose, hoping to relieve some of the pressure, strange images of a robed man screaming filled his mind. He knew that what he saw couldn't be real, or perhaps it was a memory of some sort, maybe even a nightmare, given the situation his brother was in and stress, but it seemed so very real. The pain seemed to worsen as he closed his eyes again. He was assailed by images of the same man, sprawled helplessly on the ground as if something loomed over him. The helpless missionary was covered in utter fear as he helplessly tried to crawl away from whomever approached him. This time, the vision lasted long enough for Mendel to recognize the acolyte. It was the missionary from the Triune who had been so brutally slaughtered. What does this mean? He thought. Why was he having such monstrous visions? His nose itched slightly. He brushed at it and was rewarded with several bits of dirt. For the first time, he noticed that his fingers and his palms were all covered in fresh dirt. When had that happened? He wondered. He hadn't been at the farm, much less working in the fields for some time. Had he perhaps fallen from his horse while riding to see his brother? That would explain the blackouts and the dirt, he thought. He felt as if everything around him was being turned on its head. Blackouts, the storm, his brother's dire predicament, and the odd ancient stone. That stone, he repeated in his mind. Somehow, that stone had affected him in ways that he could not yet fathom. He had heard stories as a child regarding magic places and creatures, but they had just been that, stories, nothing more. He wondered why he had seen such visions of a slayed acolyte, and immediately a thought crossed his mind that drained the blood from his face. A cold, sinking feeling filled the pit of his stomach. No, I did not. I couldn't have. He wrestled with the notion that perhaps the reason he had seen the vision from such a frontal angle was the possibility that he had somehow been responsible for it. But common sense prevailed shortly after. He had been with Achilleos the whole time, thus making him and his brother innocent of such events. However, it still didn't answer the reason why dirt was on his hands, or his gaps in memory. Thinking of his brother, he was able to steel himself. He knew that whatever troubles he faced paled in comparison to his brother's. So he straightened himself up, and perhaps it meant nothing, but not wanting to take any chances, he wiped the dirt from himself before heading back to Sarum. A pair of guards finally came for Odyssean. The rattling of the cell door and unlocking woke him, just as he had finally managed to drift off into a troublesome slumber.
"Come with us,"
barked one of the guards.
"Don't give us no problems, huh?"
As they left the building, Tiberius met them at the door leading outside. The captain seemed disgruntled, but did remain quiet. Odyssean felt that whatever was bothering the captain, it could only bode ill for him. Odyssean immediately sighted a senior figure from the Cathedral of Light. He knew that this situation had gone from bad to worse, as this was far more than some simple priest. This was the Master Inquisitor, and worse, he could see Cerinthy and Achilleos accompanying him, looking very distraught. The Master Inquisitor strode up to him, gazing down his nose at the farmer, and he began.
"Odyssean, son of Diomedes, know that I am Brother Michaelis, Master Inquisitor of this region for the Great and Golden Prophet. I come to ascertain the depths of your guilt, and thereby judge which is needed to redeem your soul."
He paused for a brief moment.
"And after that, the soul of whatever miscreant desecrated the grave of our emissary too."
Odyssean went white. The Inquisitor left no doubt that he considered the matter of the trial moot, and his guilt was already assured. Before Odyssean could even open his mouth, the Inquisitor turned from him and faced Dorius.
With your permission, Master Dorius, we will make use of your quarters for questioning of this one. I apologize for the inconvenience, naturally. The Cathedral loathes such inquiries, but they on occasion become necessary, you understand.
Dorius responding.
Well, you see, I wrote to the Procurator General in Kazan. I haven't heard word, but surely he'll be sending a proper authority to...
The Inquisitor interrupted and shook his head.
Through the Prophet, blessed be him, I carry the proper authority myself in this situation. The Procurator General will rely on my good word.
His tone seemed to reflect that, regardless of what they thought, Dorius and everyone else were going to have to rely on his word, regardless of whether they liked it or not. Odyssean grimaced. Considering how things had gone thus far, he doubted that he would be allowed to say much, if anything, unless it was to confess to the crime he seemed to already be guilty of.
There is also the matter of the Triune,
Dorius added.
As one of their own, was also a victim and, well, you see...
Michaelius cutting him off.
The Cathedral is here. The Temple is not. If the Triune is sloth in seeking justice for its children, it is their own failing.
After that, Dorius quieted, feeling defeated in the fact that the Inquisitor would not be denied. Odyssean thought, in the consoling manner, that at least Lilia had not been drawn into this whole situation. She had already suffered enough by the hands of both sex. Even as he thought that, out of the corner of his eye, he caught a glimpse of the telltale emerald green that she always wore. He glanced in that direction, but unfortunately, so too did the Inquisitor. Lilia stood like an animal caught in a trap. She had tried to hide behind the Boar's Head Tavern to watch things unfold, regardless of the warnings that Odyssean had given her. Brother Michaelius could see that she was not local, but that alone might not have mattered too much. But it was the way that Odyssean gazed at her that registered some sense of recognition that caught the Inquisitor's attention.
You there. You!
The sky thundered, this time with such force and veracity that several people, including Brother Michaelius, had to cover their ears. The wind suddenly rose up, howling like a hungry wolf, people losing their balance and thrust back by the intensity. Even several of the heavily armed Inquisitor guards were unable to keep their balance. Only 3 figures seemed to be unmoved by this fearsome gale: Brother Michaelius, Lilia, and Odyssean. The Master Inquisitor was struggling greatly, though. He tore his eyes from Lilia and returned to the prisoner. His expression was a terrible sight to behold, filled with both fury and fear.
By the Prophet, what are you?
Just then, a savage bolt of lightning struck the village center, and Brother Michaelius. There was no time to scream in pain or agony. Only a sickening, burning stench filled the air and was quickly spread by the wind. There was barely even a charred mass left behind where the Inquisitor once stood. A second bolt struck close to where the first did. People in the town began to cry out and scatter, falling and being swept aside by this fearsome wind. A large piece of rubbish flew up at his face. Odyssean instinctively blocked it with his arm, and only then did he notice that the cuffs now dangled loosely on one wrist. He touched it and the remaining cuff unlatched, as if it was never locked in the first place. Odyssean was trying to decide on what to do next, but before he could, a few of the remaining Inquisitor guards were already nearly in weapons range, and a fourth not far behind. Before the first could strike, an object which appeared to be a bench of sorts was turned into a makeshift missile and struck the guards, sending one sprawling and the other flying off with the object. Lilia appeared near the blacksmith area and gestured for Odyssean to come to her. Without hesitation, he darted in her direction. All around him, carnage proceeded to rip through Sarum. Objects flew through the air and narrowly missing the farmer. Despite all the near misses, Odyssean and Lilia seemed to be unscathed.
Lilia, you need to find shelter.
Instead of following Odyssean, Lilia grabbed his arm and pulled him towards the woods. Her strength was surprising. As they continued to run deeper into the woods, the wind and storm seemed to lessen. Glancing back at Sarum, Odyssean noticed that the sky momentarily lit up as if the sun had suddenly burst through the cloud cover. Thunder continued to rumble as if the horses of 1,000 riders trampled over the land. He knew the other Inquisitors would be after him as soon as the storm lessened, but he could not shake the bizarre events that led to the death of the Master Inquisitor, and that it would somehow be tied to him, no matter how ridiculous the events might have seemed.
Keep running,
Lilia called out.
just keep running.
As Lilia glanced back at Odyssean, she did not notice the dip in the land ahead of them just before her foot settled into it. Odyssean tried to give warning, but by then Lilia's grip on Odyssean's arm had slipped and she tumbled forward to the ground. Immediately, Odyssean went to her side. Stumbling, all thoughts of the storm and Inquisitors utterly vanished. All that mattered to him was the now sprawled out figure before him. Odyssean, feeling somewhat embarrassed for the fear and concern he had let wash over him, gave her a hand, but as Lilia reached for it and tried to stand, a sharp pain surged through her and her right ankle buckled.
I think it might be twisted.
She managed.
Could you see?
Odyssean pushed the long skirt away just enough to reveal the ankle. It was black and blue and already swollen. When the farmer put a gentle hand to it, Lilia gasped again.
I need to bring you to a healer.
No. If you do, then you'll be captured again. I won't let them do that to you.
Odyssean, feeling confused. What could he have expected to eventually happen? He could not very well just run off. This was his home. Generations of his family lived here, possibly even since the beginning of the town. Plus, there were those he could not just leave behind, especially his brother. Mandeln would surely pay if his brother could not be found. There was also Achilleos and Cerinthia. All of them could be guilty by association. Even if the Inquisitors were to leave, Tiberius would uphold his duty and arrest Odyssean on the spot. Plus, the peace warders from the Temple of the Triune were still on their way.
Odyssean.
Lilia said, but his thoughts were still fixed on those he left behind. He was still focused on a way that he could possibly move Lilia in her state and get her to a healer.
Odyssean.
She repeated, keeping her voice low. Odyssean glanced in her direction.
Odyssean. Not that. My ankle. The pain is gone.
Her words seemed to only fuel Odyssean's worry. No pain meant that her ankle had gone numb. Not a good sign. He lifted his hand from her ankle, fearful of what he might see. But this time, her ankle appeared perfectly healthy.
But how could this?
Odyssean said, staring at the limb, uncertain of what he was seeing. Then quickly he glanced at Lilia and immediately felt uncomfortable, because her gaze was already fixed on his. There was a distinct awe in them, an incredible awe that almost seemed like worship.
You turned away, but you left your hand near my ankle. I knew you weren't touching it, but I felt a wonderful warmth, and the pain, it just went away.
That's not possible. There must be a reasonable explanation. An injury like that doesn't just heal.
You did it.
He seemed to not register what Lilia just said. Why would she say something so outrageous?
I am no mage or witch. Your ankle was obviously not hurt after all. That's the only answer.
It was strange. Lilia's eyes filled with something that should have gladdened his soul to see, but it only unnerved him even more. It was adoration.
No, I know the pain I felt. I know what I sensed from your hand. And I know that all the pain disappeared as if it had never been.
Odyssean, stepping back from her.
But I didn't do it.
Lilia began to move without the least hint of injury.
Then who? Who could have performed such a miracle?
That last word sent shivers through him.
Lilia, we have no time for such foolishness.
Odyssean looked up and noticed that the sky seemed calmer around them, but the storm still seemed to brood darkly over Sarum, and another bolt of lightning flashed over the village.
That storm, it seems to be stalled. Praise be for that bit of luck.
I do not think it is luck.
Murmured the noblewoman.
Then what?
He stared into her eyes and then shook his head.
No, Lilia, not even in jest.
But don't you see, Odyssean, how timely that wind was? How righteous was that bolt that struck the arrogant brother Michaelius just before he could condemn you for murders you did not commit?
And now you'd claim that I've the powers that did slay a man? Think of that woman.
For the first time since he had met her, Odyssean wanted to be nowhere near Lilia. He was in disbelief. If he began to follow such outlandish suggestions, ideas of miracles and other mercurial events, he might as well turn himself into the Inquisitors or the Guard before he truly did endanger someone else. A soft, warm touch on his hand stirred him back into the moment. Lilia was now standing barely an inch from him.
I know it was you who healed me, Odyssean, and I believe that it is you who summoned the wind and the lightning in our time of need.
Lilia, please, just listen to the absurdity of what you say.
Fine. You want me to believe otherwise? Then prove me wrong.
She gently took him by the chin and turned his gaze towards Sarum.
The lightning still falls, bringing justice and retribution with it. The sky still roars its anger at the false accusations made against you. The wind howls at the presumptions of those who would judge you when they themselves are guilty.
Lilia, please, stop this.
But she continued, growing ever more defiant.
Prove me wrong, dear Odyssean, with all of your might, for the sky to quiet, nay, even clear. And if it does not, then I will gladly admit that I was sorely deluded.
Gladly,
Odyssean said. He could not imagine that Lilia was so deluded that she could even imagine that something like this was even possible. Without another word, he turned toward the turbulent heavens, facing Sarum. Although he could have simply pretended that he was concentrating, he felt that it would betray his companion if he didn't at least try, even though he knew that the result would be that nothing happened. Odyssean squinted and thought. He wished for the violent weather to vanish and the clouds to clear away. He tried to take the situation as seriously as he could, if only for Lilia's sake. But as he opened his eyes, he was not surprised to find that everything remained as it was. Odyssean turned back to Lilia and noticed that she was simply watching the sky, expectantly.
Lilia, I did what you asked, and you saw what happened, or didn't,
he said soothingly.
Now, let me take you away from here, Lilia. We've got to find a place where we can rest and compose our minds.
She paid him no mind as she continued to stare out past him expectantly. Odyssean's patience was reaching its end.
Lilia, you've got to pull yourself together. I did what you asked and
it came to pass,
she murmured, her face now glowing with renewed and fervent adoration. She took hold of Odyssean's hand and turned him towards the village. Odyssean's mouth hung open. The sun shone over Sarum. The grand temple of the Triune, located 2 days' ride from the south of Khajan, was a sprawling triangular edifice with 3 high towers, each situated at one of the points. The pinnacles themselves were 3-sided, and each face marked one of the holy orders. Triangular windows marked the tower from bottom to top. Most of the things concerning the structure were triangular in nature. To reach the temple, pilgrims needed to ascend 3 levels, with each level consisting of 33 steps. The entrance itself were 3 massive bronze doors, also triangular, allowing the faithful to enter. Inside were effigies to each of the guiding spirits. An androgynous figure clad in robes loomed on the left with a mystical hammer and a bag. The clerics preached that it contained the seeds of all life, which were the centers of creation. Dialon hovered to the right, another robed figure similar to the first, but it held a marble slate to its breast, known as the Tablets of Order. This figure was meant to bring purpose to humanity, and the tablets contained the writings of how to achieve blessedness. At the center stood Mephis, who carried nothing but cupped hands, as if cradling the most tender of infants. The Grand Priest mentioned that this representation surely meant that he was carrying a child, because Mephis was so caring of his flock. Inside, the main hall was yet another bronze door that gave way to various orders within the temple. Peace warders were cowled guards who wore leather with symbols of all three orders etched into their chest. They guided newcomers to the prayer rooms of their most likely choice. When the Grand Primus himself made an appearance, the walls that divided the three prayer rooms that had the appearance of stone were slid back into hidden niches, so that all could bask in the presence of the Grand Noble's presence. Today, however, the Grand Priest was in council with his three most beloved, his high priests of each order. Chief among them was Malik, senior to those of his rank. The other high priests have seen him rise from an eager acolyte to his venerable role through determination, creative thinking, and devotion to his master. He was, by all intents and purposes, the right hand of the Primus. The small council chamber was almost empty, aside from the Primus's grand regal chair and the symbol above the wall which represented all three orders, and the twin torches set on the walls with niches, which illuminated the oval-shaped chamber. The Primus himself had features as if chiseled from marble itself, so unmarred and unblemished. He had long flowing silver hair with a short well-trimmed beard to match. He had angular features with his eyes that were gleaming emerald. He was taller and stronger looking than most men. Only Malik would lift his gaze from the floor as the others knelt, to glance at the Primus. He noticed that his master's brows seemed to tremble. The Primus then quickly recovered and gestured them from the room. As they left the chamber, a shift seemed to come over the benevolent visage of the Primus. There was nothing holy about him at all, and any who would have witnessed it would have found it to be quite the opposite, and likely feared for their very soul.
West of the city,
he seemed to rasp, in a voice that seemed now more serpent than man.
West